This is about reconfiguring all of civilization, all of work, all of leadership, and stuff like that for the kinds of brains that people actually have. And I had a course in college called Marx, Darwin, and Freud. And it was a good course. It was badly taught, and it was the worst professor in all of MIT that I had, and he was the only professor 40 years later still working at MIT. So institutions really know how to perpetuate and keep their worst performers. But at any rate, this bad professor did teach a course with an interesting topic, and if you just did the reading and ignored him, you got a lot out of the course. Marx, Darwin, and Freud all decentered humans from importance, took them off their pedestal, moved them from the center to the periphery of things. Darwin, of course, said that we were just a continuation of a line of monkeys. Freud said that our unconscious mind told our conscious mind what to do most of the time, and most of our so-called free will and idea of controlling ourselves was an after-the-fact rationalization for actions that originated and been initiated by our unconscious minds. By the way, that's one point of Freud's theory that has been confirmed by research. Almost everything else he said about sexual hydraulics has been turned out to be due to his cocaine addiction and not true at all. And of course, object relations theory has turned out to be a pitiful attempt to keep doing therapy on a semi-Freudian basis after the falsity of Freud's basic ideas was discovered. And Marx showed that things like churches performed a social function of maintaining unequal social orders rather than moving social orders toward equality. Although Marx missed the biggest effect of the Catholic Church, which is its preaching against wealth itself, which causes Catholic nations all over the world to be poorer than Protestant nations of equivalent population and location and resources. Which Marx missed entirely because he didn't have valid data, and he didn't have valid data because he didn't seek valid data, and because Fisher hadn't gotten out of an agriculture department to teach the world statistics. Now let's look at some of these things. Most of the improvements in work and work systems make things at work more feminine. The reason for this is obvious. If you don't know it instantly, then it shows how unthinking you are. The world has been designed and run by men for eons, tens of thousands of years. Guess what? Most of the faults of the world come from excesses of maleness. Not only that, but the men created a philosophy that they are rational and non-emotional and women are emotional, when now we know that all this rank hierarchy, competition, win, fight, victories, business intelligence stuff that goes on is all from male hormones, swinging glands business management. So my image when I go into a business is that I'm among a bunch of out-of-control emotional monkeys, and which is one reason that it makes me effective in business, is that I'm the only one in the room not with a brain smaller than two other parts of my body. We've discovered about 48 differences in female brains and male brains, and we've discovered that intelligent action requires different sets of both of those depending on what task you're doing. So you cannot act intelligently on any test that we know of, except a very few that are non-business tests, like killing an opponent now. You need a few male hormones for that and no female hormones for that. But other than a few barbaric actions, which have dominated our idea of what great men are in history, most great men in history are mass killers. But other than a few actions like that that are barbaric, any civilized action or constructive management requires specific combinations of those male and female brain characteristics. And so you can't have a lone individual be an intelligent manager. It's not possible. We know it's not possible. We see it every day. We see buffoons pretending to know it all and do it all. And it's so clear to everybody, even them, that they aren't. But if you're a subordinate, you can't say anything or you get fired. In an Anglo culture, of course, in Japan you can say, and in Europe you can say, but the poor Americans are so dictatorial thinking they're democratic. If you think you're democratic, you end up being dictatorial. One of God's little jokes. As a friend of mine says, that kind of thing in strawberries is the only evidence he has that a God exists. Strawberries are better than any natural fruit has any right to be. Social neuroscience. This is the social modules. We've discovered recently that we have a social brain. The size of our brain seems to be related to the scope of relationships we can manage without becoming evil and barbaric and corrupt. And that's the so-called acquaintance group limit of between 125 and 150 people. That is the scope of people who know our name and whose names we know. That's our acquaintance group. And our brains are sized for handling relations in that size group. Any group bigger than that, we become corrupt and barbaric because we can't relate to or see or perceive the other people there as people. Mind extensions. Schools educate our brains, and we have a very tiny doorway that's very slow, getting 7 chunks in and out of our brains at a time over a period of 8 seconds. And then we have, once we get info in our brains, we can't find it. Our brains are very poorly indexed. What did you learn last month? What did you learn a year ago? Last month. You have no way to access it. It would take you days to access that by all kinds of abstruse associations. Well, I remember I went out with Susan, didn't I, at the end of that month, and where did we go, and what were we talking about, because it was just after. It takes days to reconstitute a memory like that. So to educate brains to make us smart is a really stupid person's idea of education, namely all the public schools and the world's top 10 colleges. It is not brains that make us smart. It is tools outside of our brains that amplify and compensate for our brain's weaknesses that make us smart, and schools don't educate or test the quality of those at all. Talk about stupid. That's really... Now, I do. So I blow past Harvard. Everything I do, blow past Harvard. But Harvard's such a low standard, it's embarrassing to have to use such a scuzzy word in a sentence. We have these people saying now in the web, in the age of the web, that knowledge is a flow, not a store. And it's your surface area, not what you expose yourself to in terms of flows of knowledge, rather than what you store in your brain that makes you intelligent. Now, you can see that this is sympathetic to my mind extension idea earlier. However, it's a little bit outre and exaggerated and silly. If knowledge is information, then that indeed is true. But suppose knowledge is more than information. Then exposing yourself to flows makes you dumber, because you get overwhelmed by little bits, end up like a Todai graduate. A vacuum cleaner for little bits, knows everything and can't think, which is the East Asian elites. Knows everything and can't think. Factual vacuum cleaner. A porcupine of tidbits of knowledge. They'll stab you if you get one of the tidbits wrong, but they can't do anything with the tidbits. They're just all passively sitting there. It's a giant collection of bits. I suspect that knowledge in our area is going to be who can make, impose, invent, and find ordered patterns on all that flowing stuff. And who turns all that flowing stuff into rigorous, well-ordered, comprehensive, detailed fractal concept maps that allow people to act on that and to keep the variety and the detail in all of that, but to order it and bring it together into coherent strands that have power. And so knowledge is not a flow, which they said. It's not a store, which we used to say. It's an organized patterning of stuff in the flow.